Philip Groff was born on July 27, 1977, in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. He is the son of Kim and Gail Groff, and he has one brother, Peter Groff. Mr. Groff served in the Marine Corps with the highest rank of sergeant, and in his time in the service, he was in Operation Marathon and Operation Allied Force. Mr. Groff speaks to why he decided to join the Marine Corps.
At the time, and I think maybe still to this day, I thought that the Marines were the best. And you know, the media of the time, books I was reading, movies that I saw, all portrayed that. So I think that at a young age, I got into my head that the Marine Corps was where I wanted to go. So that's where I went.
At first, he went to a processing center in Pennsylvania to go to Parris Island for his initial point of entry. From there, Mr. Groff started with his initial job training as an infantryman and went to a couple of different military occupational specialty schools. He gained MOSs in security and anti-terrorism. He also gained the opportunity to be a water survival instructor. Mr. Groff remembers boot camp being super impactful, and he overall had a good experience at boot camp. Mr. Groff talks about the specialized training he had in his own words.
Yeah, we were a specialized unit within the Security Forces Battalion that were tasked with extreme force protection. So we did all kinds of physical security training. We learned all the weapons that the Marine Corps has in their inventory: tactics, security, nuclear security, physical security, how to reinforce embassies. I mean, we did.
Mr. Groff was promoted twice in training before getting to his first duty station and was initially a Lance Corporal E3, where he reported to other privates or PFCs. He then eventually was promoted to a corporal, then to sergeant, which he got out of the military as. A sergeant typically will oversee about 12 Marines, and he also had another duty as a chief scout swimmer, where he was in charge of 20 Marines for some specialty duties. For Mr. Groff, conformity of military life was the hardest part of adapting for him. This meant following things that he had to do even if he didn't agree with it. Some of these things were inefficiency in the way training would happen, personal management, and historical traditions. Mr. Groff was able to work well with other Marines and adapt easily to the general lifestyle of military life. For the first 2 years after basic training, Mr. Groff was in FAST Company, Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Team. In FAST, he had the chance to participate in Operation Marathon and work with the Coast Guard on a maritime interdiction. His unit's job was to provide additional security for the Coast Guard, who was stopping human smuggling in the Atlantic Ocean. When he was on his deployment, they captured a vessel called the Januda, and Mr. Groff took a lock off of this ship. He shares his story of this experience.
When I was at FAST, so this lock represents a mission that I mentioned a little bit, but we talked about, called Operation Marathon. We were on. So this lock with no key can not be opened, but it's cool either way, with some Chinese script on the back of it. Took this off of a vessel called the Jingda, which was a smuggling trawler, freighter that we intercepted with the Coast Guard in the Atlantic Ocean, smuggling Chinese immigrants trying to get into the country. And they added a contingent of 14 of us to increase security. So we were never really told why. But instead of a normal Coast Guard operation, they put anti-terrorism Marines in the ship with them. So we ended up securing the ship, and it was in bad shape. It's got a lot of pointed history. That vessel in particular was used as a smuggling ship in the Vietnam War, and then the Chinese mafia came in possession of it, and they were using it to smuggle human beings.
Initially, Mr. Groff was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia for 2 years before he was transferred down to Jacksonville, North Carolina to go to Camp Lejeune. From Camp Lejeune, he was deployed to the Mediterranean for a Me-2 Armored Marine Expeditionary Training Unit. Mr. Groff was able to travel to Spain, Greece, Portugal, Italy, Turkey, and Israel. His unit started in Albania and ended the deployment at the beginning of Operation Allied Force, which is also known as the Kosovo conflict. Mr. Groff recalls ship life being terrible and having a real strong boredom. Ship life for him included being in a small space for 6 months. He would occasionally have shore leave, so he was able to visit new places. Towards the end of that 6-month period, his unit was stationed off of Kosovo on their ship, and they drove around in little circles for months. While Mr. Groff never saw direct combat, his unit was in a support role in the Kosovo conflict. His unit was designated to secure a bridgehead in Kosovo, but was never deployed onto the ground. Mr. Groff talks about how service changed him.
How did your combat/wartime experience change you?
Because I really didn't have any,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know that I would say it did. I kind of didn't get introduced to real levels of interpersonal violence till I was
Yeah.
till later on in my career as a police officer. I think that training for it and preparing for it, I can only speak to the emotions and how things change you in the preparatory phase, not the actual happening phase. And I don't know that that's that deeply impactful, other than there's oddities of being a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old and writing your will. It's just some unique things you do as you prepare for the possibility of going into a combat theater.
After boot camp, Mr. Groff received somewhat of a yearbook for boot camp, and it was completely in black and white. Mr. Groff mentioned that other than the quality of the photos, a boot camp book from 1925, 1945, and 1965 will all look the same. After his time in FAST, he was in 1/6, 1st Battalion, 6th Marines. He was also given a French Fourragère. This is an award that Marines in the 5th and 6th Regiment receives. During World War I, the French government bestowed the 5th and 6th Regiment Marines this award. Today, all Marines in those regiments are issued the French Fourragère to wear on their uniform. After Mr. Groff's service ended, he was at Camp Lejeune, and his wife Cynthia and infant daughter Caitlin came to pick him up to head home. He started applying for police academies and started working in the firearms industry. Within 9 months of getting out, he secured a job as a police officer. Being in law enforcement was a natural progression from his experience in the military. In conclusion, Sergeant Philip Groff was in the Marine Corps and served from 1995 to 1999. Mr. Groff is now a police officer. Thank you for your service.